the sword Blackfyre has had a long and storied history. Wielded by the legendary Aegon the Conqueror during the conquest of Westeros, the sword soon acquired its own mythical status as the most famous weapon of Valyrian steel. It was wielded by fearsome and cruel warrior King Maegor and old wise King Aerys I. He passed it on to his grandson Viserys. Viserys' son Aegon II firmly cemented the sword's importance as a symbol of Targaryen legitimacy during his coronation in 129 AC, the start of the infamous Dance of the Dragons. From there, the sword passed down through the generations. Sometimes it lay dormant, as in the peaceful reigns of Aegon the Broken King and Baelor the Blessed. Sometimes it tasted blood, as in the reign of Daemon the Young Dragon and his conquest of Dorne. But it remained an essential piece of Targaryen regalia, and whoever wielded Blackfyre also sat the Iron Throne. It was during the reign of Aegon IV that this all changed. The beautiful and wild Daena the Defiant, locked up in the Tower of the Red Keep by sanctimonious King Baelor the Blessed, broke free of her captivity with the help of her cousin Aegon IV, then a royal prince. While on the run, the two shared a passionate night of intimacy, and 9 months later, Daena gave birth to a boy, Daemon, in 170 AC. Daemon would grow up to be a fearsome warrior, winning a squire's tourney at age 12. In recognition of his impressive feat of arms, his father, Aegon IV, now king, granted his son a knighthood and bestowed upon him the legendary sword of Blackfyre. Thereafter, Daemon took the name Blackfyre for himself. Aegon IV, meanwhile, proceeded to eat, drink and screw his way to an early grave, dying just 2 years later. On his deathbed, the unworthy king made the fateful decision to legitimize all of his bastards, making Prince Daemon the true heir to the Iron Throne. Despite Daemon's claim, Daemon II, the true-born Prince of Dragonstone, quickly seized the throne for himself. Daemon would accept the situation at first, content to prove his prowess on the tourney grounds and rule as a minor lord on the Blackwater. But on the insistence of his fellow bastard half-brother, Aegor Bittersteel, he decided to make a bid for his rightful throne in 196 AC, picking a black dragon as a sigil and marching off to war. But Bittersteel had been spurred on by his hatred for his half-brother, Brynden Bloodraven, who was his rival for the heart of their half-sister, the legendary beauty Shiera Seastar. The decision to go to war had been taken rashly, and Bittersteel and Daemon Blackfyre were ill-prepared. Despite the support of half the realm, the Blackfyre army was defeated, and Daemon I Blackfyre and 2 of his sons died on the red grass field at the hands of Brynden Bloodraven's archers. Aegor Bittersteel took Daemon's remaining children and his sword, Blackfyre, with him in exile to Tyrosh. There, the bitter brother founded the Golden Company, the most famous group of mercenaries on the continent. Bittersteel would attempt to press the claims of 3 more Blackfyres before his death in 241 AC, but all 3 invasions would be as rash and ill-prepared as the original Blackfyre Rebellion. In all his anger and strength at arms, Bittersteel had never managed to surprise and overwhelm his brother, Bloodraven. But Aegor Bittersteel is dead, and Brynden Bloodraven has been sent to the wall. A new generation of Blackfyres has come of age in the tents of the Golden Company, and this one will not be distracted by personal enmities and family squabbles. Maelys the Blackfyre, known as Maelys the Monstrous, embodies this newfound strength. The huge, inhumanly strong, malformed new leader of the company gained his leadership not by simple inheritance, but by right of conquest. He fought his cousin for the command, not just by beating him in a simple sword fight, but by tearing his head off his shoulders and punching his warhorse to death. His combat prowess and sheer force of will, combined with his lack of morals, has gained Maelys the attention of 8 other powerful outlaws, exiles, pirates and sellsword captains. Together, this band of 9 has sworn an oath beneath the Tree of Crowns in the disputed lands, swearing to aid each other in conquering a kingdom for each of them. Already, the so-called Ninepenny Kings have conquered Tyrosh and the Stepstones, plundering and sacking all the way. But the big prize is Maelys the Monstrous's true inheritance, the Iron Throne itself. Pirates and sellswords are gathering on the Stepstones, ready to meet the forces of Aerys II Targaryen in mortal combat. The 5th Blackfyre Rebellion, also called the War of the Ninepenny Kings, lasted only for about a year. Maelys and his 8 allies decided to abandon the Stepstones to the huge approaching fleets of Dorne, the Arbor and the Iron Islands, and to take the fight to King's Landing itself, rather than defend their barren rocks. Just as Aerys II had ordered his lords paramount to move on the Stepstones, in hope of capturing the monstrous pretender, Maelys arrived to the Blackwater Bay itself, laying siege to the capital before the Targaryen king could escape. His army was soon joined by the armies of Tyrosh, under the command of his ally Alikro Silvertongue. The siege was a race against the clock. Word would soon reach the royal armies in the Stepstones, but their navies did not have the speed of Maelys' pirate ships and blockade runners. The Blackfyre spy network kept Maelys well informed of the enemy's movements, and when reports came in of armies gathering in the southern Crown lands, he decided to risk an all-out storming of the city walls. 30,000 Blackfyre men fought against a 5,000-strong Targaryen garrison, and after a bloody skirmish, they were able to capture the city walls, and later the Red Keep itself. The city was brutally sacked, and all of its valuables were carried off on the Ascendancy pirate ships. Together, the band of 9, accompanied by a small but loyal battalion of cutthroats, moved into the throne room, where they found Aerys. He was forced to declare his line illegitimate, after which he was thrown into the dungeon. A septon was hurriedly lifted from his bed, and the next day, Maelys Blackfyre, first of his name, was crowned in the Sept of Baelor. While Maelys I was brutal and ruthless by nature, he knew his newfound position on the Iron Throne was still weak. Swallowing his pride, he offered leniency to all lords paramount who would lay down their arms and recognize him as king. All did, fearing the plundering band of outlaws that had sacked King's Landing, but brooding in secret and clearly looking for a way to oust the usurper. To win these lords over to his side, Maelys offered many positions on his royal council. Quellon Greyjoy, Lord of the Iron Islands, and possibly the one closest in temperament to Maelys himself, was made Hand of the King. The young Jon Arryn of the Vale was made Master-at-Laws, while Edwell Stark, Lord of Winterfell, was made Master-at-Arms. One of Maelys' fellow Ninepenny Kings, sellsword captain Lymond le Share, was granted the Lord Paramountcy of the Stepstones, ensuring his gratitude and loyalty, before being granted the position of Master of Whisperers. Those Kingsguard members of questionable loyalty, or who had simply grown old and complacent, were replaced by new blood. Brynden Tully, called the Blackfish, second son to Lord Paramount Edwin Tully of the Trident, accepted the White Cloak when asked, as did a certain Marwyn of Old Town, a physically strong but also supremely intelligent young man, who had harbored ambitions to become a maester, before being approached by Lord Commander Gerald Hightower. The short reign of King Maelys I Blackfyre was characterized by a chaotic combination of small folk uprisings and constant assassination attempts. Almost immediately after his attempt to at least partially placate his powerful vassals, the peasants revolted against their king in the Reach, Westerlands and North. Years of Targaryen propaganda had transformed the Blackfyres to horrible monsters in the eyes of the small folk, and local leaders took advantage of that paranoia to rise up. In Myr, the small folk were even joined by a large contingent of nobles in an attempt to restore their old free city. But Maelys could be accused of many things. Lack of combat prowess wasn't one of them. One by one, the revolts were crushed beneath Blackfyre boots. In 262 AC, some 2 years into Maelys' reign, he gave birth to a son, Aegor, named after Blackfyre champion Aegor Bittersteel. But despite the more secure succession, assassins of all kinds worked like never before. Maelys continued on his Targaryen killing streak, determined to eliminate every Targaryen so that none could deny his claim. But in return, the Targaryens and Targaryen loyalists sent constant assassins to Maelys. 6 times an assassin managed to touch Maelys with a blade or poison. 6 times the monstrous Blackfyre managed to barely escape with his life. But the 7th assassin, a lone bowman, shot Maelys in the back of the head with an arrow. He died before he hit the ground, though some say the growth on his neck whispered one last curse. Following the death of King Maelys I Blackfyre, there was a split in King Aegor's Regency Council. In the now legendary Council of Treason of 263 AC, 3 council members presented the rest of the council with an ultimatum. Edwal Stark of the North, Jon Arryn of the Vale, and Quellon Greyjoy of the Iron Islands each demanded their independence from the Iron Throne. The remaining Regency Council, consisting of Lady Regent Arianne Blount of the Kingswood, Tywin Lannister of the Westerlands, and Lyman le Share of the Stepstones, knew that the Lords of the Iron Throne as yet felt little loyalty to their infant king. They knew that it would be impossible to rally sufficient support to fight the 3 rebel lords all at once, and in fact that even trying to rally the support of the Reach, Dorne and the Stormlands might cause these lords to join with the rebels instead, completely undoing Aegon's conquest. Knowing they had no choice, they gritted their teeth, and the Iron Throne accepted the independence of the Starks, Arryns and Greyjoys. For now. To prevent any more uprisings from threatening their rule, Aegor's Regency Council decided to send a small force to Dragonstone to imprison Rhaella Targaryen. The Lady of Dragonstone had been fighting her son, Lord Steffon Baratheon of the Stormlands, for control of the island, and even though she was the defender, Lady Regent Arianne Blount and Lord Tywin Lannister took this as an excuse to imprison Lady Rhaella for disturbing their realm's peace. Lady Rhaella refused to cooperate and continued to resist Lord Steffon's army, which was now joined by the forces of the Iron Throne, led by Sir Tristan the Defender, one of the finest commanders in Westeros. Sir Tristan proceeded to seek out Rhaella Targaryen on the battlefield and killed her in direct single combat in the Battle of Massey's Hook. The death of Lady Rhaella Targaryen was the end of an era. She had been the last Targaryen of any consequence. The only remaining person still bearing the Targaryen name was her uncle Aemon, who, upon hearing of his niece's untimely death, is said to have remarked, "A Targaryen alone in the world is a terrible thing." While Aemon was the last legitimate Targaryen, there were still some illegitimate members of the house alive, most notably the brilliant child Alinna Waters, bastard daughter of Aerys II. Following the unsuccessful revolt of Rhaella Targaryen, King Aegor's Regency decided to arrest Lord Paramount Edwin Tully of the Trident. A craven by nature, and not willing to plunge his lordship into war, Lord Edwin surrendered voluntarily, hoping to win his freedom through trial by combat. His firstborn son and heir, Hoster Tully, fought the legendary Gerald Hightower, the White Bull, and despite Hoster's considerable skill at arms, he was no match for one of the finest fighters of his age. Lord Edwin was executed for his crimes, and Hoster Tully, who had entered the capital as a fighter, left King's Landing as a Lord Paramount. In 265 AC, a band of newly independent Ironborn raided the outskirts of Old Town. Lord Luthor Tyrell of the Reach demanded vengeance, and Lady Regent Arianne Blount saw this as an excellent opportunity to strengthen Blackfyre rule. The Lords of the Iron Throne had been on high alert since the arrest of Edwin Tully, and the common soldiers were looking for a place to gather spoils and glory. Plus, the Reach was the most powerful of the remaining kingdoms, and keeping it as a friend was of utmost importance. And so, Sir Tristan the Defender was once again called upon to lead the armies of the Iron Throne. At first, King's Landing, which did not command many levies directly, awaited the actions of her Lords Paramount, but the lack of coordination between the lords meant that their forces never combined on the Iron Islands, allowing Iron King Quellon Greyjoy to pick them off one by one. Thousands of Westerosi soldiers died on the rocky beaches of Pike and Great Wick, and for a time it seemed as if the Iron Islands might successfully defend themselves. But Sir Tristan was appointed supreme commander of all forces of the Iron Throne and its vassals, and after fighting off a large band of Ironborn, who had made a surprise attack on the capital, moved to Great Wick with a token force. He was able to merge the combined war efforts of all Lords Paramount into a series of coordinated battles and a successful siege of Pike itself. The capture of Iron King Quellon Greyjoy spelled the end of 2 years of Ironborn independence. The raids stopped, and the Greyjoys once again swore fealty to the Iron Throne. Young King Aegor did not yet actively participate in his council's wars and plots, but it soon became clear that the boy had an astuteness far exceeding that of most of his peers. He was trained in combat and war by Sir Gerald Hightower, Lord Commander of the King's Guard, and Lord Tristan the Defender, two of the finest warriors of their time. Though most had expected the Blackfyre dynasty to die with Maelys, the young king was popular at court and showed a lot of promise. A betrothal to Princess Elia Martell of Dorne fell through. Instead, the young king's claim was strengthened with a betrothal to Alinna Waters, bastard daughter of Crown Prince Aerys II Targaryen. During the regency of King Aegor I Blackfyre, his father's old power base in the Stepstones and Myr gradually grew restless and rebellious. Lyman Lesher, Lord of the Stepstones, and Zobar Gokwa, the Eben Prince, had both been Ninepenny Kings, and some of the most powerful allies of Maelys the Monstrous. But they had not signed up for bending the knee to a young boy, and had been part of anti-Blackfyre factions since almost the day that Maelys was slain by that fateful arrow. Lady Regent Arianne Blount decided that the Associ bandits were not worth the trouble, and granted them independence, on the condition that they would not cause further problems. In 271 AC, Harlon Greyjoy, son and heir to Lord Paramount Quellon Greyjoy, who had been taken as a hostage following the conquest of the Iron Islands, demanded trial by combat to gain his release. Lady Regent Arianne acquiesced, and Harlon summoned none other than his father Lord Paramount Quellon himself. Though many admired the Lord's courage, in the end Quellon was defeated by Sir Tristan the Defender, the famous general who had led the very army that captured Quellon's seat of Pike. Harlon Greyjoy was sent to the Night's Watch to serve as a Black Brother, making Quellon's second son, Balon Greyjoy, the new heir to the Iron Islands. While his regency council ruled in the young king's stead, Aegor became squire to Lord Commander Gerald Hightower of the King's Guard. The 9-year-old joined the White Bull in his many tourneys, brushing his horse and cleaning the blood of his shield, while in the meantime making mischief in the alehouses and orchards with his friends Edmure Strickland and Jorgen Fossaway. The boy witnessed some of the greatest tourney bouts of his generation, especially the legendary joust between Sir Gerald and Sir Tristan the Defender. Former Master of Laws Sir George Martin would later write a series of books on the adventures of the White Bull and young King Aegor, titled Jar and Egg. After 3 years, when His Grace King Aegor reached his 12th name day, these adventures were interrupted by an important event, the coronation. The coffers of the Iron Throne were full after several years of peace, which had only been briefly interrupted by a revolt in Cracklaw Point, and so there was plenty of gold to spend on an extravagant coronation ceremony. The festivities did much to endear the Blackfyres to the small folk. Aegor's great mind and newfound combat prowess were clear for all to see, and when the High Septon placed a crown upon his head, a rousing cheer went up in the streets of King's Landing. Would the Blackfyre dynasty really survive? The latter part of King Aegor's regency was dominated by the defiances of Duskendale. Lord Donald Darklyn of Duskendale, a cruel and ambitious man, had seen the results of the Council of Treason of 263 AC, which had seen the independence of 3 Lords Paramount. He knew that even 12 years later, with the right amount of support, he could force the Iron Throne to do whatever he wanted. Lord Donald was a persuasive man, and through bribery, blackmail and rhetoric, he convinced the Reach, Dorne and the Westerlands to join his faction to depose King Aegon and crown himself as the new king. Lady Regent Arianne Blount, knowing that Lord Donald's wrath was aimed as much at her as it was at the king, understood that this huge faction would have a very real chance of defeating the armies of the Iron Throne, even if she could gain the support of the Stormlands and the Trident, something which was very much in doubt. She therefore consulted with her king, and despite his youth, Aegor, the child prodigy, pierced right through the diplomatic and political fog. Though a humble, caring lad, Aegor was wise to the political reality. Although he had no proof, and many considered it an act of tyranny, Aegor ordered the imprisonment of Lord Donald of Duskendale. Many had expected a full-blown rebellion, backed by 3 of the 5 Lords Paramount, but a small force under Sir Tristan the Defender rode through the night and was able to capture Lord Donald in his castle before word could spread. After a show trial, presided by the Lady Regent, Lord Donald Darklyn was executed. Although a stain on King Aegor's reputation, many lords would soon forget the incident. But there was one who did not forget. Lord Dennis II Darklyn, the new Lord of Duskendale and Lord Donald's firstborn son. But first it was time for the marriage between King Aegor, who had reached his 14th name day, and Lady Alinna Waters, the bastard daughter of the late Crown Prince Aerys Targaryen. The wedding was a grand affair with singers, acrobats, courtesans and jesters. Lord Commander Gerald Hightower gave Aegor his wedding gift, knighting him for all the realm to see, before lifting up his former squire and starting the bedding ceremony. Queen Alinna enjoyed the food a little too much, and she grew a belly which concealed her pregnancy for quite some time. But 9 months after the bedding, she still gave birth to a healthy baby girl, Ciara Blackfyre. But after the birth of his daughter, the joy turned to ashes in Aegor's mouth. Lord Dennis II Darklyn, the son of Donald the Defiant, had been plotting his revenge. He had gathered the support of the Trident, the Reach and the Stormlands, and followed his father in an attempt to depose King Aegor. This second defiance of Duskendale was much more dangerous than the first. 3 lords had joined the rebels, and none had joined the crown. The land surrounding the capital was soon swarming with tens of thousands of enemy soldiers. But Sir Tristan the Defender and the 15-year-old King Aegor, who joined his commander as a fellow knight for the first time, moved the royal army hard and fast on Duskendale itself. He chased down the army of Lord Dennis II relentlessly, forcing him to retreat into his castle, and then storming the castle as soon as some ladders and rams were prepared. While many lives were lost in the storming of Duskendale, it had been a necessary sacrifice. The royal troops moved in to capture Lord Dennis, thus ending the war in one quick, decisive move. Thus ended House Darklyn of Duskendale. Dennis II was executed along with many of his family members, and the lordship of Duskendale was granted to Sir Tristan the Defender, a well-deserved reward for many years of loyal service. The reward was one of the first official acts of King Aegor I Blackfyre, who had reached his 16th name day, and could now rule in his own right, without his regent, Lady Arianne. King Aegor I Blackfyre could finally do away with his regents in 279 AC. After the successful suppression of the defiances of Duskendale, the king was secure in his position, and he wasted no time in utilizing his newfound security. It was time to reconquer the 3 errant kingdoms which had seceded during the 263 Council of Treason, starting with King Osric VI of Mountain and Vale. The reconquest of the Vale was a textbook military campaign, led by King Aegor and his trusted lieutenants Lord Tristan, the Defender of Duskendale, and Derek Fossaway of Cracklaw Point. Most vassals of the Iron Throne joined the young king without hesitation, and a decisive victory at the Bloody Gate opened up the route to the Eyrie itself. Although the castle could never have been successfully stormed, some 35,000 Crownlander soldiers settled in for a months-long siege, while the forces of Steffon Baratheon and Kevan Lannister of Storm and Westerlands ran rampant through the Vale of Arryn. Lord Luther Tyrell of the Reach, meanwhile, pursued the armies of King Osric himself, slaying the king personally at the Battle of Breakstone. Osric's cousin Celaena Arryn, upon hearing the news, came down from the mountains to swear fealty to King Aegor, becoming Lady Paramount of the Vale. Following a successful reconquest of the Vale, King Aegor went on a great journey to see the wonders of the world, appointing Lord Paramount Kevan Lannister of the Westerlands as regent until his return. But when visiting the first stop on his grand tour, the High Tower of Old Town, word reached the king that Queen Olenna had given birth to a stillborn babe, Daenerys. The king blamed himself for his daughter's death, and for many months he confined himself to his cabin to grieve. Still, the tour continued, and Aegor visited the Wall, Braavos, Volantis, Norvos, Qarth, and Old Geese, and even travelled with the Dothraki Khalasar. He came back enriched by the experience, having gotten over the guilt for the death of his daughter and learning useful navigation skills besides. Although his return was soured somewhat upon hearing the news that Lord Commander Gerald Hightower, Aegor's friend Jair, had passed away. After a voyage of nearly 2 years, the king returned to King's Landing, carrying many tales and fascinating objects with him, as well as a new knowledge of the geography of the world. A few more years of peace ensued, during which the king arranged a marriage for his daughter Shiera to Lord Paramount Hoster Tully's heir. The peace did not last very long, as the reconquest of Westeros must needs continue. Young Lord Paramount Brandon Stark was fighting a war against the Iron Islands, which had once again broken free from the Iron Throne during the Second Defiance of Duskendale. But the Rocky Islands would get their due later. For now, the armies of the Iron Throne marched through the Neck and onwards to Winterfell. The reconquest of the North did not last long. A combined army of Stormlanders and Crownlanders, some 40,000 in all, successfully stormed Winterfell itself, capturing the 13-year-old boy king Brandon and ending the war. But as the Southron armies marched back to King's Landing, Aegor's messengers reported that none of the North's lesser lords had accepted their king's surrender. Manderly, Karstark, Umber, Flint, none of these houses bent the knee to their new Blackfyre king, each deciding to go at it alone. The war for the North was not so easily won. The reconquest of the Stark Kingdom would have to be completed one lordship at a time. After the successful conquests of the North and the Vale, it was time for King Aegor to once again reclaim the Iron Islands. The Iron King, Dunstan Drum, was flush with his victory over the North, where he had managed to hold on to Flint's Finger, a peninsula on Westeros that he hoped would be a springboard for further conquests. But his arrogance would prove short-lived. The armies of the Iron Throne descended on his islands, and despite a valiant attempt by Dunstan to capture the Red Keep itself, the war only lasted about 2 years. The Iron Islands were once more subject to the Iron Throne, and entered a long period of unrest as the Iron Islanders sorted out who should lead them now that the drums had proven weak. In the north, Lord Paramount Brandon III Stark had convinced his lost bannermen to return to his service. What convinced them to do so were Brandon's plans to conquer the Vale. Even though King Aegor ordered Lord Brandon, who was after all his vassal, to stand down, the authority of the Iron Throne had slipped since the Blackfyre Restoration and the Council of Treason, and Lords Paramount no longer felt obliged to comply to orders like this. Still, Brandon III did not enjoy the fruits of his labour. He was slain in a battlefield duel by Lord Eustace Sunderland of the Sisters at the tender age of 21. 291 AC was a year of contrast for King Aegor I Blackfyre at a court in King's Landing. On the one hand, Princess Shiera Blackfyre, the eldest royal child, had reached her 14th name day, and a lavish wedding ceremony was organized between her and her betrothed, Sir Elston Tully, squire to the king and heir to the Riverlands. But on the other hand, King Aegor lost his wife, Queen Olenna Waters, who died of complications related to her pregnancy. The plump and vicious queen had not been popular in the realm, but she had been the love of Aegor's life, and he organized an enormous state funeral for her. Aegor's losses were further compounded the next year by the death of Sir Tristan the Defender, Lord of Duskendale. The Iron Throne's supreme commander for decades, Sir Tristan had achieved a legendary reputation for his uncountable victories in the defiances of Duskendale, the Vale Campaign, the War of Northern Subjugation, and both of the Iron Islander Wars. His loss would be mourned. Such a man only came around once in a generation. To add insult to injury, the long-time hand of the king to Aegor, Lord Paramount Kevan Lannister of the Westerlands, who had proven adept at many skills though master of few, also passed away and was replaced as hand by Lord Paramount Mace Tyrell of the Reach. But the year 292 was still not done with the Iron Throne. Later that year, a ship arrived from the Far East in the bustling port of King's Landing. Its passengers carried a deadly visitor. Their skin was cracked and flaking, mottled black and grey. Grayscale, that infamous disease, had arrived on Westeros, and it wouldn't leave anytime soon. As the royal court was holed up in the Red Keep during the Grey Plague of 293 AC, a son was born to Princess Shiera and Elston Tully. The boy was named Aegor after his grandfather. King Aegor, meanwhile, received another grand gift from the gods when a Kohori merchant braved the deadly disease by sailing to the capital and presenting the king with one of the most sought-after items in the world, a petrified dragon egg. Elated, King Aegor happily paid the princely price to obtain the egg, and he was so impressed with the bravery and resourcefulness of the merchant himself, a Kohori by the name of Farigo Karit, that he asked the man to become his new Hand of the King, replacing Lord Paramount Mace Tyrell, who had fallen victim to grayscale. Once the Great Plague was over, the population of Crown lands and capital had been decimated, but the court at the Red Keep was relatively unscathed, and court life resumed quickly. King Aegor had consulted with his maesters and had decided to take his new egg to various places around the world that were famously associated with dragons, perhaps hoping to soften it before attempting the actual hatching. He visited the volcano on Dragonstone, the Field of Fire, the melted walls of Harrenhal, the citadel in Old Town, and the burned ruin of Summer Hall, and he even emulated his earlier reign by travelling to Volantis and Old Geese in Essos. Early the next year, King Aegor arrived back from Essos, and he ordered the preparation of a grand bonfire in the courtyard of the Red Keep. In the eyes of many, what happened next confirmed that the Blackfyres were the true descendants of Aegon the Conqueror. When Aegor walked into the fire with the egg in his hand, he came out unscathed, and the once grey egg was glowing red hot. Soon a crack appeared, and another. Before the eyes of hundreds in the royal court, a small misshapen dragon crawled out of the egg. After 143 years of absence, the dragons had returned. Sadly, the malformed dragon Eurex was not blessed with a long life. A few months later, it died, crippled and broken. Its bones were made into a unique sword, and Aegor was not discouraged. He had shown the realm that it could be done. Dragons could return, and if it was up to the king, they would. When Steffon Baratheon of the Stormlands had seized Dragonstone from Rhaella Targaryen a generation ago, he had given the island's fortress to House Prester. Following his failed attempt at hatching a dragon, King Aegor became convinced that the island should be ruled by the Blackfyres once more, so that his next egg, should he ever obtain it, could be hatched in the fires of the Dragonmont, and the resulting dragon could roam free on the island as Balerion had done. And so, after much cajoling and scheming, he incited Lord Rupert Prester to revolt, and sent his royal armies to arrest the Lord of Dragonstone, and seize his famous fortress. Lord Rupert was sent to the wall, and King Aegor soon moved his court to the island, intending to keep it as his royal seat to prove his dragon heritage. In 298 AC, Lord Huster Tully of the Riverlands organized a great tourney in Riverrun, the likes of which had not been seen in a generation. King Aegor loved his tourneys, as they reminded him of his carefree youth as a squire to Gerald Hightower, and allowed him to spend quality time with his son, Daemon Blackfyre, who was, after all, his squire. The king was a famed swordsman and rider, and in those days of feasts and revelry, he managed to unhorse all of his opponents one by one. He granted this favor to Lady Maya Martell, his future daughter-in-law, who would marry Daemon shortly after their return to King's Landing. A year later, Maya Martell would give birth to Aegor's third grandchild, and possibly the future king, Gerald Blackfyre. In 301 AC, King Aegor travelled to the lordship of Flint's Finger. This lordship, which had been annexed by the Iron Islands a decade or so earlier, had never sworn fealty to the subjugated Lord Paramount Euron Greyjoy, and was thus officially not a part of the Kingdoms of the Iron Throne. Aegor had already attempted to correct this administrative mistake, as he saw it, once before, but at the time had not been in a position to correct it with arms if it came to that. However, the Iron Throne in the latter half of the popular King Aegor's reign was much more stable than it was before, and the king was much more authoritative and threatening this time. Lord Roose Condon therefore decided to accept the inevitable and bent the knee to the Iron Throne. That same year saw the death of Lord Paramount Euron Greyjoy of the Iron Islands. Euron was a curious man. In his youth he had been ambitious and excessively confident, often talking about how he was destined to do great things and how he had prophetic dreams. But his legacy had only been that of a usurper of the Lord Paramountcy, who had not done much of note after his usurpation. Lord Euron instead took to the bottle, lamenting the loss of the alternate destiny which he had conjured up for himself in his youth. One day he fell asleep face down after another night of heavy drinking, and smothered himself in his own pillow. He was succeeded as Lord Paramount by his son, Kemet Greyjoy. King Aegor had been looking for ways to use his own popularity to strengthen the position of House Blackfyre in the realm. The matrilineal marriage between his daughter Ciara and Elston Tully bore fruit in 303 AC, when Lord Elston died and the throne passed to the king's grandson, Aegor Dragonscale Blackfyre, the promising young boy who had been born during the grayscale epidemic of 293 AC and served as the king's new squire. Daemon Blackfyre, the king's eldest surviving son and heir, was still unlanded, however. The prince had been appointed master-at-laws and had done much to ingratiate the crown to its major vassals through genial and shrewd diplomacy. However, he had also kept his eyes open for opportunities, with the enthusiastic encouragement of his lord father. It was during a trip to the Vale that a golden opportunity arose. Lady Celaena Arryn, who had been subjugated during the Vale Wars of 279 AC, was discovered as part of a murder plot. Although the intended victim of this plot was inconsequential, Prince Daemon played up the matter to the royal court, and his father, the king, acted outraged as well. King Aegor ordered the arrest of Lady Celaena, starting the Second War for the Vale of 302 AC. The war on the Vale did not last long. Lady Celaena was not popular, and not only did all the lords paramount join their king, some of the Vale's subjects joined as well, perhaps hoping the king would make them the new ruler of the Lord Paramountcy. If that was their intent, they were sorely mistaken, however. Once the Eyrie had been successfully besieged once more, and the armies of Lady Celaena chased down and defeated near the Twins, King Aegor bestowed the Eyrie and all its subjects to his son and heir, Prince Daemon Blackfyre. The Blackfyres were now officially the most powerful house of the Iron Throne, controlling not only the throne itself, but also both the Riverlands and the Vale. Having thus secured his family legacy, King Aegor was now very comfortable in his position as king. He joined the tourney of Storm's End of 304 AC, organized by his new grandfather-in-law, Lord Steffon Baratheon, and once again performed admirably, although he lost the final joust against Sir Bruce Wilde. The king also started the restoration of Summer Hall, the beautiful Targaryen summer home, which had been destroyed by fire only months before Maelys the Monstrous' ascendancy. It was not all good news, however. The king's hand, Ferrigo Carrete, who he had known since his journey to the wonders of the world some 20 years ago, and who had sold him the dragon egg, died of a mysterious illness following a dinner party. Although quickly replaced, the king would never find such a competent and trustworthy hand ever again. In 306 AC, Lord Paramount Steffon Baratheon of the Stormlands became King Aegor's new hand. The old lord had ruled his domain for over 40 years and would prove a capable servant to the crown. The Qohori family of the old lord hand, Ferrigo Carrete, was still prominent in King Aegor's court, so he decided to reward and placate them by marrying Ferrigo's oldest daughter, Tyresa Carrete, to Aegor Dragonscale, Lord Paramount of the Trident and son to Ciara Blackfyre, King Aegor's eldest child. In the later years of his reign, King Aegor became ever more reclusive. He spent much of his time at the citadel in Old Town, studying law and medicine, but also looking for any information on how to properly hatch dragon eggs. Some say he wished to escape the stressful court life. Others that the failure to hatch a dragon had taken a heavier toll on the king than was previously thought. In any case, he left the daily affairs of the Iron Throne to his son and regent, Prince Daemon, Lord of the Vale, whom men called Silvertongue for his sharp wit and skillful manipulation. Prince Daemon ruled together with his shrewd wife, Maya Martell, and Steffon Baratheon, the Lord Hand. This situation continued for around 2 years. Some say that although Aegor smiled as he rode in tourneys and held his grandchildren close, at night the man's heart was broken. As the story goes, one fateful night, the great king could be heard speaking to his old friends and loved ones, wishing they were at his side once more. They were, for that night he passed in his sleep, his heart stopping. Word soon reached the court from Old Town that King Aegor had been found dead in his private bedroom, near the laboratory where he had been working on potions and poisons as part of his silver link of medicine. A grand funeral was organized by Daemon Silvertongue, who now succeeded his father as King Daemon IV Blackfyre. The realm mourned, for King Aegor had been much beloved in the realm before his seclusion, many hailing the Blackfyre king as the new Aerys the Conciliator. King Daemon IV, who had already been a king in all but name for 2 years while his father was travelling up and down to Old Town, wore his crown well. The new king's resolve was immediately put to the test through 2 of the most famous trials of the century, that of Lord Paramount Benton Karstark of the North, accused of the attempted murder of Lady Aliona Reed of Greywater Watch, and Lord Paramount Mathos Tyrell of the Reach, accused of the actual murder of Alliser Lannister. Just barely avoiding a full-on revolt, Daemon moved swiftly to imprison the 2 men at his father's funeral, where they did not expect it. Lord Paramount Steffon Baratheon, Hand of the King, presided over their trials, and both lords were found guilty and sent to the wall to aid the brothers of the Night's Watch. King Daemon IV's coronation took place shortly afterwards. He bestowed his old lands in the Vale to his son and heir, Gerald Blackfyre. The king also took Prince Gerald on as a squire, and arranged a betrothal between his son and his half-sister, Alysanne Blackfyre, an infant girl born to King Aegor's second wife, Saria Baratheon. This incestuous marriage in the old Targaryen style caused some controversy, but King Daemon managed to convince most of his septons that the doctrine of exceptionalism applied to the Blackfyres as well. King Daemon IV's reign started auspicious enough. His royal council remained mostly the same as it was under his father, and his charms ensured a stable transition of power. However, all that changed in 309 AC, when the Great Sickness arrived in White Harbor. Decimating that once prosperous city, it slowly traveled south, killing thousands in its wake. A few months before the disease arrived on the shores of Dragonstone, an unknown noble arrived at the royal court. The Valyrian man claimed to have come from beyond the wall, where he had spent months in a dark cave beneath a large weirwood tree, and had vivid dreams that he claimed could predict the future. Some at court mocked this Olidor, calling him the Clueless, but King Daemon, who, as a Targaryen descendant, was no stranger to vivid and sometimes prophetic dreams, welcomed Olidor at his court. It soon became clear that the man had a mind for numbers, so despite objections from Steffon Baratheon the Lord Hand, Olidor replaced the Hand's unremarkable son, Gawain, as Master of Coin, although Daemon also appointed Gawain's son Serwyn Baratheon as a new member of the King's Guard to placate the powerful family. The Great Sickness reached Dragonstone about a year after its first appearance in White Harbor, and the great castle's gates were shut. It raged outside of the gates for another year and a half. Like most other families in Westeros, House Blackfyre too suffered a great tragedy in this time. Shiera Blackfyre, King Daemon's older sister, was taken by the plague in 312 AC. But King Daemon himself had lived. Normalcy slowly returned to the Iron Throne later that year, as the Great Sickness gradually subsided. However, the small folk of King's Landing, Summerhall and Dragonstone had lost much and more, and refused or were unable to pay their taxes for several years, leaving the treasury rather empty. The epidemic had had its impact on the Blackfyre family life as well. Firstly, Maelys Blackfyre, the second son of Shiera and brother to Aegor Dragonskill, had become convinced that the Great Sickness was punishment by the gods for his uncle's incestuous marriage arrangements, and joined the faith, intending to become a septon. After that, it was discovered that Queen Maya Martell had been carrying on an affair with an actual septon, Ellard Blackmont, brother to Daemon Blackmont, one of the king's closest friends. Ellard and Maya were both imprisoned. The queen was sent to the Silent Sisters, while Septon Ellard was executed for adultery and for breaking his holy vows. King Daemon soon remarried to his niece Shiera Blackfyre. Lord Paramount Steffon Baratheon, long-time Hand of the King, died of a loin disease at age 69 in 315 AC. He was replaced by Daemon's nephew and, in some sense, rival, Lord Paramount Aegor Dragonscale of the Trident, the son of the late Princess Shiera. But King Daemon could not afford rivals. Lady Paramount Rymella Tyrell of the Reach died shortly after Lord Steffon, and her lands passed to her son, Lancel Lannister. The boy Lancel had already inherited the Westerlands from his grandfather Tyland, and now he controlled the Reach as well. Daemon and his new hand Aegor had a common enemy, a 5-year-old boy who controlled the realm's food and gold, and could make life very difficult for the Blackfyres when he grew up. If he grew up. In 315 AC, King Daemon IV broke the betrothal between his half-brother Aenys and his daughter Rhaenys. With some reluctance, as the king was a believer in the Targaryen tradition of marrying into their own family, Daemon instead arranged the betrothal between Aenys and Ella Lannister, the sister and heir to Lord Paramount Lancel Lannister, the boy ruler of the Westerlands and the Reach. It was a shrewd move that ensured the Blackfyres would eventually inherit this gigantic realm, provided of course that Lord Lancel did not have any children of his own. In 317 AC, Prince Gerald Hightower, Lord of the Vale, came of age. He had grown up to be a popular party guest, who made friends easily and was always ready with a sarcastic or bawdy quip, although he always had more of an eye for the men at court than the women. So when the cruel, proud and craven Sir Robert Tallheart, the realm's master-at-law, made yet another diplomatic faux pas, King Daemon invited his son to come down from the Eyrie to replace Sir Robert as the realm's master-at-law. Since Lord Aegor Dragonskill was still Hand of the King and Regent, 2 out of the 7 council positions were now occupied by powerful young Blackfyres. Later that year, Parman Fossaway, the powerful lord of Cracklaw Point and the Ocean Road, rebelled against Lord Lancel in the hopes of gaining support from the crown. Lord Parman commanded an impressive levy, nearly half that of his liege lord, and might have succeeded in his revolt. But King Daemon, already deep in debt to the Iron Bank of Bravos, refused to give support to this adventure. He had other plans for the West, and they involved keeping Lancel on the throne, at least until the marriage between Aenys Blackfyre and Lancel's heir Ella could be consummated. Later that year, King Daemon, aged 33, consummated his marriage with his niece Shiera, aged 14, and while the girl first bore him a stillborn babe, she later gave him a son, Rhaegar, a sickly dwarf, who was nevertheless welcomed by both Daemon and Shiera. Meanwhile, Daemon's half-brother Aenys, who would become Lord of the Westerlands and Reach if all went well, grew up to be a clever but abrasive young boy, who insulted his courtiers and was willing to do anything to anyone to escape punishment. Still, despite his ruthlessness, the boy was brave and godly, and King Daemon granted him a knighthood on his 14th name day in 321 AC. The summer of 323 AC was an auspicious one for House Blackfyre. After 20 years of near-constant construction work, the beautiful palace of Summerhall had been restored to its former glory. The lush green gardens, the richly decorated halls, the well-stocked kitchen, all had been lovingly repaired and improved, and now the Targaryens' true heirs had restored that which had been destroyed just before King Maelys' ascension. At Summerhall's opening, Daemon's half-brother Aenys came of age, and his thorough education had paid off. He replaced Olidor the Clueless as Master of Coin, though the Valyrian lowborn dreamer was still appointed as Master of Whisperers. But the warmth of the summer did not last. A messenger arrived shortly after the Blackfyres returned to King's Landing, bearing news that the wall was under attack. King Daemon did not hesitate to help the Brothers of the Night's Watch and their Lord Commander Anders Baratheon. A contingent of soldiers was sent north to aid in repelling the wildlings, and the soft warm breezes of Summerhall were replaced with the sharp cold winds of winter. Luckily for the realms of men, the invasion was repelled, and the Night's Watch fulfilled its duty as their shield once more. In 325 AC, Lord Paramount Lancel Lannister, the young lord of Westerlands and Reach, fell from a high tower during a late-night stroll in Highgarden. Many suspected King Daemon and his spymaster Olidor the Clueless, since it was a public secret that the king had attempted to get rid of his powerful vassal several times before, but none could prove it. Certainly the king had a clear motive, though. His half-brother and Master of Coin, Aerys Blackfyre, was married to the new leader of Westerlands and Reach, Ella Lannister, who would later adopt her mother's name as Ella Tyrell. The stage was now set for a precarious Blackfyre balancing act. In the west, the king's brother, Lord Consort Aenys Blackfyre, ruled as hand of the king to his wife. In the Riverlands, Aegor Dragonscale, the king's nephew through his late sister Shiera, ruled as Lord Paramount of the Trident and hand of the king. Prince Gerald Blackfyre, the king's son and heir, still ruled in the Vale, and the king had even granted him a royal privilege. The prince could call himself King of Mountain and Vale, and could wear a crown. In the future, this powerful Blackfyre triumvirate might possibly be joined by Princess Larissa, the king's daughter, who was betrothed to Lord Paramount Theo Karstark of the North, though for now she was still too young. The gouty, morose King Daemon would not live forever, and with all these powerful young Blackfyres, the ingredients were there for a civil war the likes of which had not been seen since the Dance of the Dragons. In 328 AC, Olidor the Clueless, the Valyrian adventurer who had travelled beyond the wall and had served as the realm's Master of Coin, died after a period of hard work, which had gotten to his heart. He was replaced by King Daemon's close friend, Lord Paramount Steffon Baratheon of the Stormlands. Sir Olidor had been married to Jeanette Martell, the heir apparent to Dorne, and the king was quick to marry his youngest daughter Jaehaera to the couple's second-born, Quentyn. The last years of King Daemon's reign were spent mostly in the back rooms of the castle of Dragonstone, where the gouty, depressed king doted over his children and grandchildren. 4 years of peace and good government under Daemon's Blackfyre-dominated council ended, however, when the king died bedridden in 332 AC. Prince Gerald came down from the Eyrie with great aplomb and was quickly installed as the new king. As one of his first acts, he confirmed the reappointment of his cousin Aegor Dragonscale as hand. His brilliant wife Alysanne would replace Gerald himself as Master of Laws. He also moved the court back from rocky Dragonstone to the much more comfortable Red Keep. Although Aegor Dragonscale was placated for the time being after his reappointment as hand, there were still plenty of other claimants to the throne. King Gerald started with his alleged younger brother and current heir, Jaenar, who did not share his siblings' white hair and was widely suspected to be an illegitimate son to the king's mother, Maya Martell, and her lover, Ellard Blackmont. King Gerald sent his legion of spies to investigate this rumor of illegitimacy, intending to proclaim the prince a bastard and bypass him in the succession in favor of their half-brother, the clever dwarf Rhaegar. But there were still Lord and Lady Paramount Aenys Blackfyre and Ella Tyrell of Westerlands and Reach. Immediately after the death of his brother, Lord Aenys travelled Westeros and Essos, searching for opportunistic bands of adventurers. He meant to emulate his ancestor Maelys the Monstrous in taking the throne from his nephew Gerald, and was able to raise an enormous host of more than 40,000 troops. The First Blackfyre War of Succession had begun. The First Blackfyre War of Succession took place in 336 AC. The pretender, Aerys Blackfyre, Lord Paramount of Westerlands and Reach, and brother to the late King Daemon IV, had gathered an army of mercenaries, adventurers, and Richmond volunteers to try and press his claim on the Iron Throne. The reigning King Gerald I Blackfyre, son of the late King Daemon, was joined by his master of coin and mentor, Stefan Baratheon of the Stormlands, his brother-in-law Theo Karstark of the North, and, crucially, his cousin Aegor Dragonscale of the Trident, as well as all the minor lords of the Vale, whom the king had ruled as crown prince for a decade and a half. Aenys the Pretender, meanwhile, could not even convince his wife Ella Tyrell to join him, so the Westerlands and Reach, together with Dorne and the Iron Islands, remained officially neutral in the conflict. By reappointing Aegor Dragonscale as Hand, securing his loyalty, it seemed the king had avoided certain defeat. Had Aegor joined the rebels, it seems likely that Aenys' wife would have also joined the fray, and perhaps even the Dornish. But even without their support, Aenys the Pretender was a formidable foe. He moved quickly into the Crown Lands, laying siege to King's Landing within months. A master of logistics and supply, Aenys also organized about half of his large besieging force into a mobile field army. Knowing Crown loyalist contingents from the south would have to cross the Crown Lands to join forces with those from the north, Aenys led his army to swiftly defeat these contingents before they could move to the Royal Army camp at Sow's Head, buying himself time to finish the siege. During the war, King Gerald was able to deal with another one of his enemies, his bastard half-brother Jaenar. When the royal spies discovered that Jaenar had been trying to assassinate his brother, the king, before the king could definitively prove Jaenar's illegitimacy, the king sent men to imprison his half-brother. Jaenar was sent to the wall, never to be heard from again. The first major battle of the war was a rebel victory. A 12,000-man army led by Aegor Dragonscale was attacked by Aenys' much larger mobile army at Hayford and decisively defeated. Aegor Dragonscale's son Jacaerys was slain in the ensuing rout. The rest of the war was a race against the clock, as the inhabitants of King's Landing resorted to eating rats and cats, and a constant barrage of Aenys' trebuchets weakened the walls more every day. The Royal Army camp at Sow's Head swelled with reinforcements from the Vale and the Crown Lands, ready to move the moment it was deemed safe to relieve the city. But King Gerald's most loyal vassal and master of coin, Stefan Baratheon, had not been idle in the meantime. While the rebel forces were weakened from months of living in their muddy siege camp, the Lord Paramount of the Stormlands moved in with a fresh force from Storm's End, attacking Aenys' besieging army directly and relieving the capital. The royal army at Sow's Head, hearing of the relief of King's Landing, marched south to intercept the fleeing rebels, and in 2 further battles near the city, managed to decisively defeat the rebel army. Aenys the Pretender himself was slain by Lord Jaime Derry, just outside the walls of King's Landing. The First Blackfyre War of Succession was over, and Ella Tyrell, while she was not punished because she had not participated in the rebellion, was forced to marry another Blackfyre, young dwarf prince Rhaegar. The next years were quiet at the royal court, but certainly not quiet for its vassals. Infighting in the north and a convenient series of suspicious Karstark deaths resulted in the deposition and return of Lord Paramount Theo Karstark, the king's brother-in-law. War also broke out between Ella Tyrell of the Westerlands and Reach and Aegor Dragonscale over some minor Riverlander territory. His enemies divided, King Gerald felt safe enough to enjoy himself, making some improvements to his castles and participating in tourneys. The king even took on a young peasant boy, Ormond, as his squire. Lord Paramount Theo Karstark of the North was an unpopular and a weak man. He had gained the North through happenstance, lost it again to his stronger sister Rhaessa, and then gained it again by happenstance, and some all too convenient deaths. Still, the man was arrogant and entitled, resenting his brother-in-law King Gerald for not intervening, despite persistent rumors to the contrary. When it became clear that Lord Theo had led a campaign of vicious slander against his liege, King Gerald decided enough was enough, and he sent an army of Stormlanders and Crownlanders north to handle his annoying brother-in-law. The War of 340 AC was over very quickly. A few victories in the swamps of the Neck effectively ended northern resistance. The royal host was led by Sir Gerald Carlet, famed for his aggression in battle and the speed of his forced marches during his campaigns, and included Sir Merrick, one of the best siege engineers in the Reach. The army soon arrived at the gates of Winterfell, and Commander Carlet set Sir Marwick to work preparing for a siege. The Karstark bannermen, however, were not willing to endure this for their unpopular Lord Paramount, and forced Lord Theo to open the gates and negotiate with Commander Carlet. With Theo Karstark now removed from the Northern Throne, King Gerald had to select a successor. This proved more difficult than expected. The king had expected the Northerners not to accept another Karstark, and instead chose Eddard Starkglass, the bastard son of Lord Paramount Renly Stark, the last of the Stark rulers of Winterfell. He expected the Northern Lords would welcome the return of House Stark, but instead the incompetent Leckwit Starkglass was replaced with Bernard Karstark almost the moment the royal host left the north. Lord Bernard in turn was replaced with Rickard Karstark, an altogether more competent man. King Gerald, not willing to go to war again, rolled his eyes and accepted the situation, marrying his son Maelys to Lord Paramount Rickard's only daughter, Sabitha. More bad news arrived from the north the next year. Gerald's bastard half-brother, Jaenar, who had hated his brother ever since his banishment to the Night's Watch, had been well aware of his brother's sexual preferences. As one last defiance from his impotent position, one night he snuck into the Watch's rookery and sent out ravens detailing everything he remembered about his brother's sodomy. Every night Gerald spent with a male lover, every kiss he stole from a handsome squire, even his relationship with a much older male septon. While some of it was undoubtedly made up, much of it was later confirmed under oath by those self-same lovers or other eyewitnesses. Jaenar had made life significantly more difficult for his brother, and he had taken what little revenge he could. The unrest among the vassals of the Iron Throne continued, even as the small folk of the Crown Lands were starting to remark upon the peace and prosperity of King Gerald's reign. Aegor Dragonscale of the Riverlands was fighting Ella Tyrell of Westerlands and Reach to regain control over Riverlander land. Ella Tyrell was captured during this war, and Aegon gained a significant bit of territory in the resulting ransom bargain. Steffon Baratheon of the Stormlands saw a chance to press his claim on Lady Ella's lands through his Tyrell mother, while Ella was in Lord Aegor's dungeon. However, he had underestimated the remaining strength of Lady Ella's wealthy kingdoms. Once she was released by Lord Aegor, she soon repelled the Stormlander forces. In 347 AC, the unthinkable happened. In a parallel to what had happened to his grandfather Aegor the Grand Patriarch more than 50 years before, a merchant arrived at King Gerald's court at the Red Keep. He carried with him an ornate chest containing one of the most valuable objects in the world, a dragon egg. King Gerald, who, like his father, had sent out men to find one all throughout his reign, happily paid the extortionate price, and immediately started to make preparations for the hatching ceremony, dusting off his grandfather's old tomes. During his candlelight readings of dragon lore, King Gerald was accompanied by his former squire and close companion Ormond Chetwood, now donning a white cloak as a brother of the King's Guard. The egg had caused great joy among almost all of the Blackfyres at the royal court, but Maelys Blackfyre, the king's half-brother, had frowned at the sight and disappeared from court that same night. The young prince returned later that year, his coffers filled with a loan from the Lord Magister of Lys, and at the head of a great invasion fleet. He knew now was his last chance to press his claim. He would stand no chance at gaining the Iron Throne if his brother rode a fully grown dragon, and so, perhaps rashly, Maelys landed in the Crown Lands with a large army, intending to seize the moment while he still could. Simultaneously in the north, a man named Aeron Firestone coordinated with Prince Metares and launched his own invasion fleet from Braavos to reclaim his ancestral holdings in Carhold. The second Blackfyre War of Succession was not quite as destructive as the first. Prince Metares had jumped into action too rashly and too ill-prepared. He had not gathered enough ships to land his full army all at once, and so had to make several round trips. This gave the Royal and Stormlander army and the commander Gerald Carlet plenty of time to defeat each landing party separately, never allowing Prince Metares to combine all of his not inconsiderable force. King Gerald's other loyal vessels, Vale, Riverlands and North, meanwhile, dealt with a much smaller secondary invasion in Carhold. Aeron Firestone had expected all of the Iron Throne's forces to have concentrated on Prince Metares, but had miscalculated and was quickly defeated. With the capture of Prince Metares and his banishment to the Wall to join his half-brother Jaenar, the War of Succession was over. As the armies returned to the fields, King Gerald proceeded to light a grand bonfire in the courtyard of the Red Keep. As he walked into the flames holding his dragon egg, many expected him to die. But the Blackfyre King emerged on the other side of the fire, holding a young, sprightly dragon. The old-timers who had witnessed this ritual being performed 50 years before remarked that Gerald's dragon seemed much more lively and healthy than Aegor's had ever been. Was this truly the return of the Dragon Lords? In the late 340s AC, Aerys Blackfyre, Prince of the Vale and heir to King Gerald, married his young aunt Rhaelynor in a grand ceremony in the Aerys courtyard. King Gerald brought his dragon, Neritos, and the teenage couple enjoyed playing with the little critter, chasing it around the castle. After the wedding, King Gerald appointed his namesake, Commander Gerald Carlet, to train his son in military strategy, something the boy had shown some aptitude for, even if his skill with the sword left something to be desired. In 351 AC, one of the Blackfyre's most loyal vassals died. Lord Paramount Steffon Baratheon of the Stormlands had served as Hand of the King and Master of Coin for decades, even serving under King Daemon, but had suffered from cancerous growth, which killed him at age 69. He was succeeded by his grandson, Aegon Baratheon. Lady Paramount Ella Tyrell of Westerlands and Reach, another vassal who had been a fixture in the Iron Throne for a generation, was murdered by a disloyal vassal at age 46. She was succeeded by her son, Daemon Blackfyre, which meant that with Aegor Dragonskill in the Riverlands and Prince Jaehaerys in the Vale, Blackfyres now controlled 4 out of the 7 kingdoms. But despite the strong position of House Blackfyre, there was no harmony between its members. Rhaegar Blackfyre, husband to the late Ella Tyrell, left to join his brothers Jaenar and Metares at Castle Black. Though ostensibly the Lord Consort did this voluntarily, he was known to have committed murders, and some suspect he left for the Wall to avoid persecution. 3 sons of Daemon were now serving as brothers of the Night's Watch, and only King Gerald himself remained in the realms of man. The relationship between King Gerald and his son Jaehaerys of the Vale was also as strained and difficult as it had always been. The ambitious, proud king, obsessed with the prestige of his house, had always had high expectations of his heir, never satisfied with the boy's patient, temperate nature. Even when the boy came to swear fealty to his father, the king mocked him relentlessly, telling him in no uncertain terms what he was doing wrong. Some say they spotted tears rolling down Prince Jaehaerys' cheeks. Paranoid that his father would come find him, the prince ordered his doorway to be bricked in, and cursed out his entourage when they protested. This erratic behavior was not unusual for Jaehaerys. Some say the man had been driven mad by his father's constant mockery. It was about 6 months after these events when Queen Alysanne died of an infected old wound. The wise and authoritative, though not always just, queen had served the realm as Master of Laws for decades, and had been King Gerald's constant loving companion. Devastated, the king took to the bottle in a major way, disappearing from the keep he had so diligently expanded and into the streets of King's Landing, where he reportedly indulged in a night of drinking and visiting bawdy houses to enjoy the company of male escorts. The king's cousin, Aegor Dragonscale, the Lord Hand, sent out a search party the next morning, but it was too late. The king was found with his face down in a puddle, with a bottle of fortified Dornish red in his hands. The rule of Aerys II Blackfyre, the rude, paranoid and eccentric king with a heart of gold, started in a dangerous position. Daemon Blackfyre, the king's cousin, ruled Westerlands and Reach, while the king's hand, Aegor Dragonscale, ruled the Riverlands. There was also the king's brother Maelys, who had been granted the Vale and the position of Master of Whisperers, in an attempt to placate him. All these Blackfyres had claims on the Iron Throne, and Aerys had to play them against each other to even hope to survive. Outside of the immediate family, there was also Aegon Baratheon, the ambitious young Lord of the Stormlands, who was open about his ambition to increase his power, even hinting at a Baratheon kingship, unrealistic as that sounded. In 358 AC, a daughter was born to King Aerys and named Alysanne after her grandmother. The king's first child was his son Aerys, who had been born around the time of his grandparents' death a year before. The unpredictable King Aerys immediately announced a betrothal between the two infant siblings in the old Targaryen style, and placed a dragon egg in Aerys' crib. Later that year, a raven arrived from Aerys' uncles at Castle Black. The wall was under attack. The wildlings had united under Hagan Talltalker, and the Night's Watch was requesting the aid of the realm. King Aerys saw this as an excellent opportunity. He had been trained by Gerald Carlet after all, one of the best commanders of his generation, and had been looking for an opportunity to test his training, and his dragon, Neritos. So the king rallied the banners of his northern vassals and marched to and beyond the wall to defeat the wildling host. Hagan Talltalker had given the Watch a run for their money, but against a host of 10,000, his armies quickly melted. The dragon Neritos, now about the size of a pony, successfully protected the king during his clumsy but inspiring battlefield duels, and the war was won in 6 months. The combat experience that Aerys gained proved invaluable immediately. In 359 AC, King Aerys II ordered the arrest of Aegon Baratheon, Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, to make him answer to several accusations of murder. But anti-Blackfyre tensions had been building in the Seven Kingdoms, among what few Lords Paramount remained outside of the royal house. Aegon Baratheon refused to come to King's Landing, raising his banners in revolt, and was joined by Rickard Karstark of the North and Jeanette Martell of Dorne. The three powerful vassals together called for an end to the arbitrary tyranny of House Blackfyre and the abdication of King Aerys. The clear anti-Blackfyre message of the rebels convinced Daemon Blackfyre, Aegor Dragonscale and Maelys Blackfyre to rally with the crown or risk losing their seat. The stage was set for the bloodiest and longest conflict in a century, the infamous Great Revolt. Most members of the enemy houses that were present at the Red Keep were forced into house arrest, including the grandchildren of Jeanette Martell and Serwyn Baratheon, member of the King's Guard for a generation or more. Sir Serwyn was later released after his family paid a ransom, and even allowed to stay in the King's Guard. This was, however, a grave mistake. The 71-year-old knight broke into the royal bedchamber one night, shouting death threats against King Aerys for the injustice done to his family, and he drew his sword against Sir Harris Kidwell, remarking that even at his old age he could cut through him like carving a cake. However, luckily for House Blackfyre, this proved an empty boast. Sir Harris defeated the traitor Sir Serwyn, who was clapped in chains and fed to Neritos at dawn the next morning, witnessed by a furious King Aerys, who was now more than ever determined to refuse any compromise with the rebels. The bloodiest battles of the war took place in the plains and wooded hills between the Kingswood and Storm's End, with the royal army led by the king personally. The Battle of the Broad Arch was a smashing royalist victory, which left some 8,000 Stormlander rebels dead on the field. The siege of Storm's End took the better part of a year, during which time the Dornish took most of the islands in Blackwater Bay, including Dragonstone, but eventually Aerys' army captured the rebel castle. This new foothold in the Stormlands ensured an uninterrupted supply line for the spring campaign of 361 AC. The royal army of Vaelmen, Riverlanders and Crownlanders under King Jaehaerys defeated a large host of Northmen and Stormlanders led by Aegon Baratheon personally at the Battle of the Parchments. But when the defeated rebels were chased down and given battle again at Haystack Hall, the king's brother, Prince Maelys of the Vale, was slain in the fighting. This war had cost tens of thousands of lives, and something drastic needed to be done to stop it. The defeat of a large Dornish host at the Battle of Fountain in the spring of 362 AC presented the opportunity that was needed to end this rebellion. The army had been guarding the entry to the Bone Way, which now lay open and unguarded. A small mobile vanguard led by the king marched through this treacherous mountain pass and through the Dornish deserts to Sunspear itself, and Jaehaerys ordered his allies to do the same. As the host besieging Sunspear grew in size every day, a negotiator left the castle, waving a white flag. He proclaimed the death of Princess Jeanette Martell, and that the Dornish were willing to lay down their arms and accept the overlordship of her grandson, Quentyn of Pab, the son of Hodor the Clueless, who was married to Jaehaera Blackfyre, and also happened to be under house arrest at the Red Keep. King Jaehaerys accepted. Without their Dornish allies, the battered Stormlands had no chance against the Iron Throne, and Aegon Baratheon too surrendered, accepting his imprisonment and giving up Storm's End and the Stormlands to the crown. That just left one last rebel lord to deal with. Rickard Karstark of the North's participation in the rebellion had been unpopular with his vassals. Many had refused to send their troops south, or had even allied with the crown. So knowing the lord's weak position, when Karstark refused to surrender, King Jaehaerys in turn refused any compromise. He sailed what remained of the royal army all the way from Sunspear to allied White Harbor, and marched from there to Winterfell. He was soon joined by the rebel northern lords and forces from the Vale and Riverlands, and the gates of Winterfell finally fell when the king deployed his dragon, Neritos, who burned the Karstark men in the main gatehouse, allowing the royal rams to break down the gates unmolested. Rickard Karstark was arrested, and after 5 years of brutal warfare, the longest and bloodiest conflict in Blackfyre history was over. During the Great Revolt of 359-364 AC, Aegor Dragonscale, Hand of the King and Lord Paramount of the Trident, died peacefully in his sleep. Lord Aegor had been a constant, reliable ally to the crown under 3 kings, serving as Lord Paramount and Hand for more than 50 years, and his death was sorely felt at the Red Keep. The Riverlands are inherited by Aegor's son Daegar, who died shortly after, passing the seat to his daughter Larissa Dragonscale. Lord Paramount Daemon Blackfyre of Westerlands and Reach, seeing that House Dragonscale had nearly died out in the male line, saw this as sufficient justification to claim the Riverlands for himself, despite being only a second cousin to Larissa. And while the royal army moved on Sunspear and then Winterfell, he marched his levy on Riverrun and took the Riverlands for himself. The small folk started calling Daemon the King in the West, but he was no king. He was a dishonorable opportunist who now controlled half the realm. King Jaehaerys was furious, but did not yet have the time or manpower to deal with his powerful cousin. He had to handle the aftermath of the Great Revolt first. The rebel lords Aegon Baratheon and Rickard Karstark were fed to the king's dragon, Neritos, while the king looked on, stone-faced and cruel. Quentyn Martell, the third rebel lord, was kept in the Red Keep's dungeon for the time being. The rebel lands in Stormlands and North were confiscated, and King Jaehaerys, looking warily at his cousin's power in the West, and understanding that the rebellion had been driven as much by anti-Blackfyre sentiments in the realm as it had been by Baratheon ambition, decided to grant the kingdoms to loyal Andal vassals, rather than his Blackfyre kin. Storm's End and the Stormlands were given to Oliver Musgood, Lord of Dragsgrave, one of only 2 vassals who had not joined their Baratheon liege in his rebellion. Lord Oliver was a just, honourable and kind man, so the king's choice was begrudgingly accepted by the other Stormlander lords. Winterfell and the North were granted to the man who had received the royal fleet in his White Harbour, allowing a fast disembarkation and an orderly campaign. This man was Harlan Manderly, the fat and lustful Lord of White Harbor, who despite being a slave to earthly pleasures, nevertheless spoke with authority. Sadly for the Lords of the North, the old Lord Harlan would die about 4 years after the end of the Great Revolt, leaving the realm to his incompetent and much less popular son, Donald. His flanks now secure, King Jaehaerys looked to his cousin in the west. He consulted with his small council to see what could be done to break Lord Paramount Daemon's immense power, and agreed that no man should hold more than one kingdom under the Iron Throne. When this message and the accompanying ultimatum was sent to Highgarden, and the dismissive reply was sent back, the king ordered his vassals to raise their levies once more. But his small council stayed quiet. The king, outraged, shouted his orders again, louder from his throne, and when the council remained quiet, jumped on the table and kicked over their wine goblets. But then the door to the council chamber opened, and a contingent of rainbow-cloaked faith militants barged in, together with the High Septon himself. His Holiness, pointing at the king, declared him incapable of rule and ordered him seized. The small council, which included the king's brothers Daemon and Jaehaerys, and his wife Rhaenor, looked less than surprised, and the convenient timing of the coup suggested the involvement of Lord Daemon as well. Yet it was not clear that the council's intentions were actually maleficent. After all, it could not be denied that the king had always acted in a strange and irrational manner, and this had only increased after the Great Revolt. Regardless of the motive behind this decision, the king was dragged to Maegor's Holdfast, where he was held under house arrest, while a holy regency under the High Septon ruled the realm. It was 365 AC, and renewed civil war had been avoided. For now. The regency lasted 2 years, but was over when the king managed to escape Maegor's Holdfast and make his way to the White Sword Tower, home of the King's Guard. Still an inspiring general and diplomat, despite his near lunacy, he convinced all 7 brothers to follow him to the Tower of the Hand. He barged into the Hand's chambers and arrested the High Septon himself, declaring an end to his regency. The High Septon was sent to the wall, but not before bellowing that the king was no longer a part of the Faith of the Seven and would no longer be welcome in any set. The next High Septon considered this excommunication justified and refused to revoke it, further damaging King Jaehaerys' already poor reputation. As one of his first acts after the restoration of his direct rule, King Jaehaerys called to trial Quentyn Martell, Prince of Dorne, who was still under house arrest at the Red Keep. Despite the fact that he would probably have been let off with a warning, since he did not participate in the Great Revolt directly, Prince Quentyn, who rivaled the king in unpredictability, stunned the realm by calling for a trial of the 7. 6 Kingsguard knights and King Jaehaerys himself would fight Lord Quentyn Martell and 6 other men of his choosing. This holy endeavor attracted many spectators, and King Jaehaerys, wielding Blackfyre, personally slew Prince Quentyn of Dorne, chopping off his right hand and then stabbing him in the heart. He also defeated his relative Olador Blackfyre, but did not slay him. The king's combat prowess impressed many, and Dorne was inherited by Quentyn's teenage son Bernard Martell, who was married to the king's sister Dioryl. While in the west, Lord Paramount Daemon of Westerland's Reach and Trident attempted to quell a rebellion, and in the south, Bernard Martell tried to fight off a claimant to his throne. The royal branch of House Blackfyre was strengthened. Prince Aerys, King Jaehaerys' son and heir, had slept with a dragon egg in his bed since his wet nurse days, and it had finally paid off. In 369 AC, when the prince was 12 years old, the egg finally hatched. Out of it crawled the world's second dragon. The king's brother and hand of the king, Jaehaerys Blackfyre, died during an outbreak of bloody flux. After the Holy Regency under the High Septon, the relationship between the king and his brothers Jaehaerys and Daemon, the Master of Coin, had been complicated. The king could never prove his brother's involvement in the coup against him, and they were both competent councillors. But the atmosphere in the council chambers had never been the same. Still, Lord Daemon was experienced and considered a genius by many, so King Jaehaerys, despite everything, decided to replace one brother with another as hand of the king. While Lord Paramount Daemon was distracted fighting his rebellions, King Jaehaerys decided to test the waters for his planned wars of conquest in western Essos. He threatened to invade the city of Tyrosh, which was fighting a war of its own and could not hope to resist a full army from Westeros, let alone one led by a dragon lord. The island of Bloodstone was taken as well, and granted to Thaddeus the Fearless, the famed duelist who had trained Prince Aerys so ably. Sir Thaddeus was replaced by a Braavosi water dancer, who honed the prince's moves with the sword into a fine art. It soon became clear that Prince Aerys was on track to become a legendary swordsman, worthy of wielding Blackfyre. It was good that the heir to the Iron Throne was turning out well, because King Jaehaerys' mental state was ever deteriorating. He had been observed howling at the moon from the roof of Maegor's Holdfast, and had been overheard ordering the reinstatement of First Knight and the appointment of his horse as Master of Laws before he was gently escorted out of the council chamber. While most of the time the Blackfyre King was lucid, this did not bode well for the future, and many were looking at Prince Aerys, or even Lord Daemon, to preserve the realm's newfound stability. In 372 AC, the High Septon declared the restoration of the faith militant. Naturally, he had no authority to do this, but since the king was still excommunicated, he felt no obligation to consult his liege. Jaehaerys, fuming, wished to march on the great sept of Baelor and burn the place to the ground. In 373 AC, at a small council meeting, he was foaming at the mouth, screaming orders to seize the High Septon and throw him to his dragon Neraitos. Lord Gaemon, the king's brother in hand, knowing that a move against the faith might well mean the end of House Blackfyre, ordered the king arrested once again, proceeding to rule in his stead. The brothers' regency lasted only 6 months. Gaemon was deposed and imprisoned by King Jaehaerys later that year. But before the king could feed his brother to his dragon, Gaemon curried the favor he had built up with the faith to demand a trial by 7. King Jaehaerys, unpredictable as always, agreed to his brother's proposal, and even joined the fighting himself. At the start of combat, he immediately stormed towards his brother, holding Blackfyre up high, and forced the blade through Gaemon's right pauldron, driving it so deep into his brother's shoulder that it reached his heart. Gaemon was dead, and the king had become a kinslayer, the most heinous of crimes. Jaehaerys' son and heir, Prince Aerys, had grown up to be an excellent swordsman, with a good mind for military strategy to boot. Brave and strong, but also quick with a hurtful jape and cruel punishment for any perceived slight, the prince was feared and loved in equal measure. After his uncle Daemon's trial of the 7, Aerys, understanding that his kinslayer father would ruin the realm if left on the throne, calmly walked up to the crazed king. The words that were spoken between the two remain unrecorded to this day, but, following the conversation with his son, Jaehaerys spent a few days in uncharacteristically quiet contemplation. The king then emerged and announced that as penance for his crimes against the 7, he would take the Black and join the Brothers of the Night's Watch. He flew to the wall on the back of his dragon Neraitos, and even took Blackfyre with him, though he decreed that the sword should go to Prince Aerys upon his death. And so Jaehaerys, the mad warrior king, spent his days exploring what lay beyond the wall. The king spoke often of his exploits, claiming he had seen children of the forest, giants riding mammoths, white walkers on the backs of giant ice spiders, a valley of peaceful farmers nestled between snowy mountain caps, a blue crystal palace full of men made of ice, and even, after being absent for many months, giant shrieking lizards, a gigantic fortress made of fused black stone, and a city made entirely of bone. The truth of these wild, unproven claims made by a lunatic king will forever remain a mystery. The reign of King Aerys returned a sense of normalcy to the Iron Throne. He correctly assessed that not the faith, but his powerful second cousin, Lord Paramount Daemon of the Westerlands, the Reach and the Trident, was the most immediate threat to his realm. Shrewdly, the king flattered, threatened and bribed many of Lord Daemon's vassals. He soon presented Lord Daemon with a petition signed by nearly all of them, lamenting the absenteeism of their wise ruler, and requesting Daemon to give the king leave to appoint another steward to his domains in the Westerlands. The implicit threat was obvious to Daemon. All those who had signed the petition would beg the crown if he refused. and so he bowed to his nephew, graciously gifting him the crown of the rock. King Aerys granted the Westerlands to Tywell Rayne, Lord of Castamere, who now joined the Stormlands in the north as a grateful crown loyalist. Sensing weakness, two rival claimants proceeded to declare war on Lord Daemon in an attempt to install themselves as Lords of the Reach. One such claimant, Lady Ellery Hewitt, even managed to capture Daemon. The Lord Paramount of Reach and Trident died in her dungeons, and was succeeded by Daemon II Blackfyre, a 10-year-old boy. King Aerys spotted an opportunity to profit from the chaos in Daemon's realm, while simultaneously saving face in the High Septon crisis. The High Septon was much better disposed towards the young prince than he had been towards his father, and was willing to come and listen when his presence was requested at the Red Keep. King Aerys discussed Daemon's succession and requested that the High Septon declare Daemon II's rule illegitimate. The king also made it clear that while he wasn't like his father and had no desire to burn down the Seat of Baelor, he could still make life very difficult for the Faith and its soldiers if needs be. The High Septon understood the threat, and also the implicit royal recognition of the Faith militant, and soon declared Daemon's rule illegitimate until a council could be called to determine his father's succession. The king, citing the High Septon, ordered the young Daemon II and his regents to come to King's Landing to stand before a great council. When they refused, he raised his levies and ordered his lords paramount to do the same. It was a very opportune time, as Daemon II's levies had not yet recovered from the Claimants' Wars, and almost the entire realm, including many of Daemon's vassals, joined the popular young king and his young dragon Anagainon. King Aerys chased down Lord Daemon II's army throughout the Riverlands, eventually defeating it at Crab's Shore, where a small but potent dragon burned hundreds in a second field of fire. Once the royal allies laid siege to Highgarden, Daemon II surrendered, and the king granted the Reach to Urathon Hightower, while the Trident was returned to Lyessa Dragonskill. Daemon was left with a minor lordship in the Reach. The looming threat of the Blackfyres of the Reach was broken. While his first years as King of the Iron Throne had seen shrewd and far-sighted policies that successfully broke Lord Daemon's hegemony over the West, King Aerys was still his father's son. With no one left to truly oppose him, Aerys became ever more cruel and untrustworthy, not to mention increasingly unhinged. Believing himself to be Azor Ahai reborn, he ordered the reforging of a hardened sword, which he turned over to the Alchemist Guild, who covered it in wildfire. The king delighted in insulting his courtiers, and skillfully brandishing his burning sword if they resisted, on occasion even chopping off an ear or slicing a cheek. In 381 AC, the king visited his exiled father at the wall, and Prince Jaehaerys taught Aerys how to ride his dragon. Together, the two flew into wildling territory, burning down a gathering force. His father encouraged his son's growing delusions, even likening him to Aegon the Conqueror. King Aerys took this comparison to heart. Although he had built up significant goodwill with the High Septon by convincing his father to abdicate, he now lost all of it in one fell swoop. Aerys, already married to his sister Alysanne, now also married his other sister, Gale. The Faith cursed him for this sinful act of polygamy. But the king's campaign to emulate the Conqueror didn't end there. In 383 AC, he declared war on the free city of Myr, seeking to expand the Iron Throne's meager holdings on Essos and gather glory for himself and his house. However, and King Aerys' advisors knew this well, Myr was part of a broad defensive alliance against Westeros, and soon called in its allies, Braavos, Norvos, Qohor, Lorath and Lys. Aerys had not expected such resistance, and had certainly not expected the speed with which his enemies moved to secure the island of Dragonstone. But dragons move faster than ships, and King's Landing is closer to the island than Essos. While the forces of the Iron Throne arrived too late to prevent the Essosi coalition from securing a beachhead, they did manage to drive off the besiegers. Thinking the day was his, the king celebrated in Dragonstone for days, before word reached him that another force had landed in Driftmark and another on the other side of Dragonstone. Invasion forces kept coming and coming for the next year. Tens of thousands of soldiers landed on the shores of these islands, and tens of thousands were slain by dragon fire and cavalry charge. The war became bloody and brutal, culminating in the violent maiming of Queen Alysanne. She died in her husband's arms, and men say the king was never quite happy again. Their manpower reserves destroyed on Westerosi beaches, the forces of Myr retreated behind the curtain walls of their great city. But the king, vengeful and reckless, dodged many a scorpion bolt before descending upon Myr with great fury, burning barracks, hospitals and merchant houses, and even women and children in the street. The city, or what was left of it, soon surrendered to the Iron Throne, and the bloody and costly conquest of Myr was now complete. With the conquest of Myr, the Blackfyres had proven to be not only rulers of Westeros, but rulers of the Narrow Sea, and they had secured their crown for generations to come.